The name Tamalayanja Nepal Neta Shoba Deleta Netashitalex.
Good morning, everyone from Nepal, or hello, wherever you may be.
Then that Rian around the Yanja said that Mutuni Jasimuju Tomi Gizebi Jasilali Sudimati shooting the rest.
So today we continue our Dharma teaching on Gyese Nyosho Tokme's 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas.
But Chidang that ring take watching big Yana Kibu Chimbugi Lam La 2 year. Ani the Kibu Chimbos and a Zo dita cousin Kibu Chuadang Jingwa the Tare, drink ups about Kibu Chimbugi Lam. 2 young do take Kibu Chimbos, Kibu Ding, Kibu Chunjun said the Tam Sebore de condition Shagirusina. So the Ulung the Kibu Chunjung the Kibu Ding the Rangde Rang Chipuji, the Nasusum la Tartu Gilochiga Kibu Ding the Korwa Dua Rigdun Rang Chipuji, the Tarpa Totugi Lo Shani Dilla Karasigas na Kibu Chunjum Kibu Ding Sigures Kibu Chimbo Malag Zindi. That did it all the nothing but Chimbo Yin. Young is around the Manso, not take what Chimbo Yin, like Kibuta Chimbo the Yin, some game Mambo, you rest me Manchos. Not take what Chimbo Yin again, and around some months ago, take what Chimbo Yin means take what Chimbo 지게 냠레 치바 잠지 되게 말해. 고농데 대과심을 인고래. 심지어 탐지 되니 지 타바다 탐지 김비기 고발라 토백이 체도. 되니 랑상게다 야나 대과심부 상기 심지어 탐지 타바다 탐지 김비기 고발라 토백이 체도. 되니 지 Gevacheva Hana, Chue Chevatilla, Teni Tebachimbo, Segure, Tebachimbo Am, Teni Kibuchimbo, Segures, and they do Tading Tachu Mashi Gondo, Teni Kenambasama, Teni Sem di Chiga Kibu Chunjum Kibu Ding Dawaji Yuna, Maju Baina, Sem dia Chuji, Teni Tebachimbo, Sem di.
So today we've arrived within the text to the path of beings of greater capacity, or the Mahayana, the great vehicle. And so last week we went over the path of beings of lesser capacity and the path of beings of middling capacity. But then how do we define, how do we know the difference between beings of lesser capacity, middling capacity, or highest capacity? Really, the measure of one's capacity is entirely dependent on one's motivation. So that beings of lesser and middling capacity are both entirely motivated by their own personal aims. For beings of lesser capacity, the goal is to be liberated from the lower realms of samsara for themselves. Beings of middling capacity want to liberate themselves from all 6 realms of samsara. And their wish to liberate themselves only is what determines them as beings of lesser capacity or beings of middling capacity. That's the reason why we say they're not beings of higher capacity. Now, most of us probably think, I think a lot of us think, oh, I belong to the Mahayana. I follow the Mahayana, the great vehicle. I am a being of greater capacity. I think many of us think that way. But following the Mahayana or being someone of greater capacity isn't about what type of practice you do. It's about what type of motivation you have for your practice. The motivation of a person of great capacity is the wish to bring all beings onto the levels of liberation and omniscience. And for that reason, to wish to achieve Buddhahood oneself in order to liberate all beings and bring them onto the level of Buddhahood. And that is why, that is the motivation with which one practices virtue or practices the Dharma when one is a being of greater capacity or a follower of the great vehicle. So that being the case, then, before we start the Dharma teaching today, I would like to remind you all to check if you have motivation, if your mindset is that of a being of lesser or middling capacity, please change that. Please bring up the mindset, bring up the motivation of being of higher capacity, bring up the motivation of the Mahayana before and embrace your activity of listening to this talk with this motivation.
The kulong di tanjing the shu di anji goba tobe gichidu ani ta dambo simje tham je sanji gobang tobe gichidu rang nipa yo mare ani rang la da janju gi simdi janju semba nashin ta kibu chimbu nashin ngazo le ke yo mare tanda ngazo kharsna le dambo ba indu ani janju gi simdi ke yo mare le dambo indu tani tuni manazala nyuba yo mare simje thamje sanji ji gobang koe gichid de indu ta dambo karichi gorsana member janju gi simdi ke chine tani dambo simje thamje gi sanji gobang thobe chedo rang sanji go tangara sanji gi ne sanji ne tani nge simje thamje chikya malu ba tani sanji gi sala ngai 키기 거기 재미있는 담자 켈린 담자 지금 아니 지금 최년람 주두바 아니 조선 검송 가래 제나야 아니 그런 페이지 디다부 따부 니다부지도
And so this motivation of a follower of the great vehicle, as I said, is to establish all beings on the level of omniscience or Buddhahood. However, at the moment, as beginners, we do not have the capacity to do so. As beginners, we do not have the Bodhichitta motivation of a great being. We have not given rise to Bodhichitta like that of the great Bodhisattvas because we are beginners. That being the case, as beginners, we don't yet have this power. We don't yet have this capacity to establish all beings on the level of Buddhahood. That's why first we start by generating bodhicitta in aspiration, so that first we aspire to reach enlightenment ourselves, to reach the level of Buddhahood ourselves, so that having reached Buddhahood, we can then bring all beings without a single exception onto that same level of enlightenment. And so we can make that commitment now. We can make that commitment to reach the level of Buddhahood for that reason, and engage in all of our activities, whether it's teaching the Dharma or listening to the Dharma, whether it's study, contemplation, or meditation, engaging in all of these activities with that motivation.
Daddy kulong data hobi ne tatring sember jawi ta nye ge chue di tene jase moju thongni gi zebi jase lale sudi mati res.
And so suffusing this motivation or embracing today's activity of listening with this motivation, please think, this is the reason why today I'm listening to this teaching on Gyaltsen Yoshul Tokme's 37 practices of the Bodhisattvas.
Tene digi tenju shung de la tene tomar kewa le ki ten parde kewa shung ki ten tamar kewa ju ki ten sene sungi nani tomar kewa de la shubar chewa tan chamar tam chewa nich de song sa bare tene shung ki parde kewa shung ki ten de la muishi kebo sum ji lam te bas mare tambo konda ngondro chola juzu da ngoshi kebo sum jilam tembas ni kinani ngondro gi chu duni re duni de cha cha bare ngoshi lo do ngoshi de kebo sum jilam la juzu ta trenkap so ba ngoshi kebo sum jilam gi juzu de nang ne kebo chungmo chungjong da lam ju juzu da kebo ding lam juzu da kebo chembo lam juzu sum gi nang ne trenkap so ba kebo chembo lam 주소들의 기부 중요다 등이 차사버레스 가정은.
And so within this treatise, within this text, among the virtue in the beginning, the virtue of the introduction, the virtue in the middle, the main part of the text, and the virtue in the end, which is the virtue of the conclusion, we have already covered the virtue in the beginning, which consisted of the homage and pledge to compose, and have arrived at the virtue in the middle, the main part of the text, which itself has two parts, the manner of engaging in the preliminary stages of practice, of which there were 7, which we've already covered, and the main practice, which consists in the path of the way of engaging in the path of the beings of the 3 capacities. Among these, among the 3 paths of the beings of lesser capacity, middling capacity, and highest capacity, we have finished going over the path of the beings of lesser and middling capacity, and have arrived at the being of highest capacity.
Is it a dream? Dunsin Chuba de la Zawa Didini, Tongme, Dunin Dala, Zawa Jin, Manam Dugna Rande, Jishija, Dechir Thai Simjin Dalchi, Dalji Chir, Janju Simji Jazala Yin Sung.
And so this in the text is the 10th verse, which reads, "The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to arouse Bodhichitta, so as to bring freedom to all sentient beings, infinite in number. For how can true happiness ever be found while our mothers, who have cared for us throughout the ages, endure such pain?"
Daddy. Tanda Gongdu Shebi Kibu Chumoda Kibu Dingi Cups in around Janju Visem Meba Shiki Res Janju Sem Meba Siduzani Simji Tamji Gichedu and Sanji Goban Tobe Dan Tarban Tamji Kimbi Goban Tobe Gichedu 단데 기부 충고다 기부 딩급 시기요 말레스 다 디마시도 네 기부 첨부 값수 심지 탐지 다른 탐지 기부 고방 그 체도 네 셈기기 레스 디도 가지 기부 첨부 이바다기 공도 시험나지 야 지그 심지 탐지기 체도 마치버치 랑 타바다 탐지기 고방 토백이 지부 지리나 되네 되고 좀 자기요 말레스 되고 첨부 암 기부 값 자기요 말레스 되고 첨부 최소 좀
Previously, we covered the paths of the beings of lesser capacity and middling capacity, which are not based on the motivation of bodhicitta. Beings of lesser capacity and middling capacity are not practicing for the sake of bringing all beings without exception onto the level of liberation and omniscience. That was not addressed. That is why in the part on the path of the beings of lesser and middling capacity, the text does not speak of the motivation of bodhicitta. However, now that we have arrived to the path of the beings of highest capacity, that is the motivation, the mindset is to practice in order to bring all beings onto the level of liberation and omniscience. Therefore, if one is practicing for the sake of just reaching liberation and omniscience for ourselves, but not in order to bring all other beings onto that very same level, then one is actually not following the great vehicle. One is not following the path of the beings of highest capacity.
칸이 망치워져 가와도나야 아이가서 태바 멤버라베 메파 괜찮다 태바 멤버래 나 태바 첨부이 나 상하기 주지기 스트롱 태바 첨부가 나네 너 태바다 나기 태바스 니기 나네 나기 태바 인식이 다 망치워져 나라서 냐면지기 페이지워지 칸이 시디기 태바 첨부이 시기래 다 태바 첨부 칸이 시와서 되게요 말에 택바 첨보다 택바 충중 암 단지 공도 시와기 나라서 기부 충무다 기부 딩스 기부 첨보 인세기 개발이 자와디 간이 체결으로서나 셈기통 제거레스 칸이 시와서미 되게요 말나 인상박이 찍고 되게요 말레스 다디 자와디 개발 체사디 셈기통 제거레스 개발
So really most of us nowadays, I myself, for example, we like to say that we follow the great vehicle. We like to say, oh, I belong to the Mahayana. Wherever we go, we look down upon lesser vehicle practices, lesser vehicle followers, and we say, oh no, I follow the great vehicle. And even within the great vehicle, between sutra and mantra, I follow the mantra vehicle. I'm a practitioner of secret mantra. Most of us like to think like that and to speak like that. But it's not enough to just say it. It's not enough to just declare that you follow the great vehicle or the vehicle of secret mantra. As I've said, the only real difference between the lesser vehicle and the greater vehicle, or between beings of lesser, middling, and highest capacity is in the mindset. It's not about what you declare yourself to be. It's about, it's entirely based on your mindset. So really the root of the difference between great vehicle and lesser vehicle, or between the beings with different capacities, is their motivation.
간디질을 쓰기로서나 대가 대기니 공도 슈바나 신레 다 남기 karchab ki sinjin chabere sinjin karchab ki leda dunga chabedu leda dunga yobi ki sinjin thamje tingi sanji ki sal am chanju semba am tani sanji ki sal gugi yi sambach tini te goya ki chedu tini ram tini tekpa chimbo ki chu parjin tungla soba tini 지게 냠레 치니 심지 탐지 기체 되니 심지 탐지 기체도 대바심보다 발진 둘라 소비게 주 치니 되니 남라라 심지 탐지 기체도 상지 고방도 도배치 다 데이터부 지겐지기 당사지라 되니 다 대바심보스나 되게 Kibu Rabsina Tigires.
So what do we actually mean by the great vehicle? It is, as I've previously explained, sentient beings pervade the infinity of space, and this infinity of sentient beings is itself pervaded by suffering and karma. So in order to lead all of these beings onto the level of Buddhahood or the levels of the Bodhisattvas, we vow ourselves to practice the trainings of the great vehicle, to put into practice the teachings of the great vehicle, such as the 6 transcendent perfections, the 6 paramitas, in order to bring all beings onto the level of Buddhahood. That is why we train on the path. And so if one practices the teachings of the great vehicle, such as the 6 transcendent perfections and so on, with this motivation for the benefit of all beings, then one can say that one is a follower of the great vehicle. Then one can say that one is a being of greater capacity.
Yeah. Litzawa de la Tongme du Dabla Zevajins, Manam do Narande Chichi Jas, the Tsing Indige Tongme du Ne, Dabla Zevajins, Tatambo, Maranzo Memba de Simge Chige Simke Berjebala, Tambo, Maranzo Maju namge tadani misimje thamje sanji ji goba thobe gi chedu tene ram da parjin chu la so bu gi chu chi yamdu ta maju namge simje thamje siddha jane thambo ma khan majur se di ma majur bachi kya medu ta simje di thambo moshi go ma ne thome duni dal sewa chen siddha jane khorwala thoma yo mares Thoma said the Tama said Yomare. Namkala talk Namkala Yandini, Thoma said the Tama Medusani, Namkala Peshana to give. The Indo Takrala Thoma Messi do Karisigers and around the Simgi, Gundila Sigaris. Simgi Gundila Thoma Yomare. Tazin Chiona, Sim Kurandila, Dini Thoma Medu, Dini Tamaya Yomare. The Induzani Korwa de la Thoma Medu, the name Majur Namgistan, Ma Majur with that Korwa Thoma Mebani, Ma Majur with Simji Chicken Yomare, said the Takumzin Dela. The Mati Thoma maybe the Ma Majur with Simji Chicken Meduzani, Ma the condition Ma said the Shaggy or Sinam, the name Kuzana Mishalon the Zunala Yuri, Marshia, but teen temper, teen super said. Tambo mai kandi be di she gore tani magi tin di she gore ani magi tin swedan gi ko di pena kusala mi shanon du na sabo ten res ma se de condition res se idu ta ma se de ta chi maju nam gi ta na ne simje thamje ma yu bi gyumsen di danda rang danda tse di gi ta amal pe shana di res Sedigi Amadi Dini Tawagu Tani Amagi Togola Nardu 간디지 강아 유메 되니 알아서 나네 마게 차베젤라 되니 아마데기 보고들라 장종 간디지 유메 베나마 간데 동아지 강아지 채나야 되니 보고들라 지 강아 채 마주니 빼면서 차송나 빼 장모샤 장소나 차보샤 칼라 무유소나 칼라면은 칼라테 아니 뚱에면은 뚱에테 아마 코랑라 메나야 부글레테 칸이 고나에 체니테 디레지 지는 자와 지금도 전에 디나지는 게 답에 딜레샤네 체디게 아마라 샤네 그러나 통마미 심제 탐지 자랑게 단다게 아마 나시 지는 마란줄라 제가 지자래 지차바래 가시 파마다 딜레 합 마지나야 딜레 두가다 지요 말레스 세디게 아마레 합과 지요 가시 딜레 두가다 지요 말레스 데데기 지엔도 통마메 비드니 나올라 자와제 세데 자와 지기 아마드 시게다 마주 남바스도 마 마주 심제 메두 디기 마디다 나올라 자와 지기 마디라 시게 레스
So these two lines here in this verse, how can true happiness ever be found while our mothers who have cared for us throughout the ages endure such pain? This is really the basis of the reflection for first generating bodhicitta and aspiration, thinking of all beings throughout space as our own mothers and wanting to establish all of these beings onto the level of Buddhahood. In order to do so, one must first recognize that all beings have been our own kind mothers since beginningless times. And the reason why we say that all beings throughout the infinity of space have been our own mothers is because, as it is said, they have cared, the text says they have cared for us throughout the ages, or really literally the Tibetan says since beginningless times. And the reason we say this is because samsara is beginningless. You can think of it as space. Space likewise has no beginning or end, right? So just in the same way, samsara has no beginning. The reason is that the mind stream, this continuity of mind, has no beginning either, and therefore has no end. And so just in the same way, samsara itself, cyclic existence, has no beginning. And because it has no beginning, as we've been circling since beginningless time through samsara, all beings have at some point been our own mothers. So what does it mean for all beings to have been our own mothers? This is taught very clearly in the words of my perfect teacher, where it says that first one must recognize all beings to have been our mothers. Then one must recollect the kindness of the mother, and finally repay the kindness of the mother. So how does one do so? How should one reflect upon this? Well, one can take one's own mother in this life as a basis, as an example. The mother who has carried us in her womb for 9 months with great difficulty, given birth to us with great difficulty, and then after birth, who has taken care of us with so much kindness, going through so much hardship to always keep us warm if we were cold, or to cool us if we were hot, to feed us even if she herself has no food. Thinking of all the kindness and all the hardships that one's mother may have gone through in this life, we can take this as an example. Thinking of the mother and her kindness and love that she has showed us in this life, and thinking that all beings have at least been this kind to us. We shouldn't think that they've done worse than our current mothers. We can think they've maybe done better even. They've at least been this kind to us throughout beginningless times. All beings have been our kind mothers in this way. The mother who shows love, the mother who shows kindness. This is the example that one should keep in mind when recognizing that all beings have been our kind mothers since beginningless times.
Rangi the Pama Simje Tamji Pama Machibachi can ne Sambaji Tamboranji Taji Jagor, Pam Simje Tamji Rangi Pama Chidu Chimindu, Toma Neban, Toma Yoma, Toma Medus and Simje, that Tandagi die in a re, Tandagi Ni in a re, Tandagi Topo Tomo in a re. Said Dilla Toma Medus and Pama Machibachi and Pichibachi Ujumare. Dayanchi during Topo Tomoyanchi during the Nani Pamayanchi and do Pejeta, Pama Machiba Chica Yomare, somebody, a symbol Leon do. That is Simji Tamji Pama Machiba Yomare, the Inaya Pama to Tama, Timuk, that's it, Timuk, Suduzani, Koala Cam de do, the native Chuji, Twenaya Chu. 퇴기 콘솔라 고가메 생엄마그 레기지 되니 디 마리바기 되니 코르와 지 코르와 파캬 용알 망고지 용데 아니 데다 탐지 파마 탐지 콘저 개와 두고 삼바다 디과 빵고 삼바다 랑돌기 가야 미시 되니 고몽스 고파 Hamagun in a Miglong Watabu, the native Sada, Chiglapa Chamdin, Penangarazo Lamba, Chiglabrode, and a Miglongwa Chipot, Koros Chigo, Tena, Kota, Miglongwa, Toporos, Shishimara, Collechiegi, Kola, Kaya, Yoma, Tap, Kaya, Medu, Taku Kawa, Drogo, Kawa, Drozo, Mekorva, the Ditilla Cham, the Tumamu, Young. That around Tabujina, that's a question. 지금 딱 나라서 이 지기를 강사진도 되니 가르상 거르스나 지 파마된저 아마디 나라라 딘침부이 지랑 담보 중중이 개베가서 로마시에 가서 조엘라 사마시냐 사엘라 되니 롭달라 조당라 되니 롭달라 땅 조송 제 파마니 되니 나라서 미침부스 알아서 개발수 다 망보지 근데 파마돼서 되니 다단다랑 태바신 뭐 이세니 파마들 파 칼라사 용도자니 칼라지야 마트바지 랑 모모신 부지사 야나 피자 신부지사 근데 대형나 되기입니다 랑기양 브랜드 코세 콜로지 코엔 근데 아마지 치로라 파마 심지지 치로라 통도 장대 프로진 메시지 장대교지 통되나 렘보민도 다 칸이 대과신 뭐 있으면 다 대과신 뭐 있어야 되다 마지막으로 지야미도 아직 파마인 값을 된대기 말아 지진부 종요래 다 단다 심진지 된대진 갈래 카데 값을 말아서 통되나 되니 람상 디 심진디기 동아래 파 교배기 콜레 동아들에 달리기 지니 로직게 고레스 딜 당기 공도랑 아주 세라 대과신 뭐 심진 탐지 산시 고방 그라고에 기체도 되니 나다 최지게스 라글린 지게스도 다 라글린 인지미지 칸에 심진 탐지 결고 말해서 파 미통나 심진지 근데 강아지 태버지 통나 남사 아치 마이 디덴데 장도 근데 칼라라고 민도 마랑 칼라데 남사 파제지 다테 케고 담보 남상 다테 투피 말에 돼 이나야 단다 값을 봐봐 삼바 장주 쪽도 샘케세 값을 단다 값을 봐고 드링기 기부 친구들 남 샘케는 디기라세 디 동아를 잘 보소 디 동아를 잘나 지마롱 삼바도 드리지 중간 디기레스 Didi danda sikje iba diki tungi do manam dukna rangde chi si jas ta maju na tsimje damje tumal duk de do rang dewa chi ki de yapo de ndo ta khande khachi gore lawata gore.
So it's important for us first to examine this, whether or not we think it's probable that all beings have been our own parents in previous lifetimes. Is samsara beginningless or not? Does samsara have a beginning? If cyclic existence indeed does not have a beginning, then we can check and think, no matter what relationship we have with beings now, whether someone is our enemy, our friend, or a stranger, it's actually likely, if samsara has had no beginning, that all beings have at some point been our parents in the past. Likewise, they've likely also been our enemy or our friend in a past lifetime. But it's quite likely, it's quite probable that all beings, that there isn't a single being who hasn't at some point been our own parent in a past lifetime among this infinity of lifetimes. So once we've come to this conclusion, then we should think, well, all beings have at some point been my own kind parent, but they wander in ignorance within cyclic existence, not having the opportunity to hear the Dharma, wandering under the sway of the karma they have accumulated over previous lifetimes, suffering, going through all sorts of sufferings within cyclic existence, not knowing how to practice virtue and abandon misdeeds, not knowing what it is that should be adopted and what should be abandoned. They are like a blind person wandering the streets. A blind person doesn't know when it's safe to cross the street or not, right? And just in the same way, our parents are blindly wandering in cyclic existence, not knowing what to do or what not to do. Now, if we think that we are followers of the great vehicle, and we think of the kindness that these mothers have shown us throughout an infinity of lifetimes, teaching us to walk when we didn't know how to walk, teaching us to eat when we didn't know how to eat, helping us with schoolwork, sending us to school, paying for our education, making sure that we would grow into educated, successful people. Remembering the kindness of our mother in this way, if we ourselves think that we are followers of the great vehicle, then how can it be okay for us to be enjoying good food while our mothers are starving right next to us? You wouldn't be eating delicious dumplings or pizza and not give any food to your parents, would you? Or you wouldn't be wearing brand clothes and leave your parents out in the cold. So just in the same way, thinking of the kindness that all beings have shown to us as our mothers in past lifetimes, if we ourselves are think that we are followers of the great vehicle and that our aim is to liberate all beings, bring them all onto the level of Buddhahood, then remembering the kindness of our parents that all beings have shown us in past lifetimes, as soon as we see any being in difficulty, as soon as we see any being suffering or going through hardship, we would immediately want to liberate them from that suffering. we would immediately give rise to the wish to liberate that person, that being, from their suffering. If we saw someone going hungry, we would immediately want to share our food. It doesn't have to be, it's not just about specific practices. It's also just about seeing one person in difficulty and wanting to help that person. Of course, at first, as beginners, we're not able to just give away everything. We're not able to give every time that we see someone in need. However, at first, we should train to give rise to that aspiration, to give rise to the wish to free all beings from their suffering, thinking, how wonderful would it be if I was able to free all beings from their suffering? If only I could free all beings from their suffering. And this is what's meant here by this specific line. How can true happiness ever be found while our mothers who have cared for us throughout the ages endure such pain? How can we possibly enjoy the good life when beings throughout space are suffering in this way?
장주 셈바 장주 세디 장주 셈바 세디라 가르세에서나 빠와 편순 속바 단톡바 편순 속바 이 데이터 나라서 장주 셈바 못마들에 단다 예비세 게세디 상기기 예비세 게 장주 셈바 코나발라 숨기레스 장축 셈바스의 방화 편순소와 똑바 편순소 다 똑사와다 방화 편순소가 상마 방사와 장축 세지도와 디츠니디 등게래 다 단다 값을 봐봐 알아서 디값 단다 장주초도 셈게 세디 알아서 레 당보바 다 장주 셈바 셈게 네 람라 라겐지라 슈게레스 딜라다 야지갸 방어 비준 속반 도바 비준 속바 장축세 되기 찍디 나랑소라 톱이요 말이 되는 게 공도 쉬바 나시네 자디 간에서나 단다 세면시 값수 멤버 세면시 값수 세면시 세 되게 심제 탐지 대화든 데비 주단 멤버 유지 삼바치 아니 심제 탐지 동아다 자워쇼 삼바 심기기지 잠바단 인지니 잠바단 인지니들라 단다 레 당보발라 나라우스 칼레스는 장주 셈바 모마데 친이바데 자기요 말레스 이나야 야제 야게 나니 야제 납주디 자기 레스 규디디레 잠바단 인지 네 땅좀 세메 아니 디 세메 실라 시딜라 가르세르스는 규레 장주 셈바 규레 디 규라더니 데고데 네 모네 장주 셈바 등기 아와 편소소바 또바 편소소바 세디 장축 세지도와 장세도 전에 다 아와 편소소바 탐지파 장 축세도 전에 또바 편소소바 탐지 축바 네 상계 세나디게 장축 세나디게 델라더니 디부들 슈규레스 단다 니비시 게라 소바 템졸라 슈규레스 당아라서 바보 레 당보 발라다 단 데데디 멤버 장주 셈킨 람라라 규레스 디니들 고두스.
Now, when we talk about bodhisattvas or bodhicitta, the word bodhi, awakening in Tibetan, is made up of two words, two syllables that mean purified and developed. And what this refers to is that a bodhisattva, a true bodhisattva, is one who has fully abandoned, fully perfected abandonment and fully perfected realization. That is what a true Bodhisattva is, such as the Buddha's 8 close sons, the Buddha's 8 close disciples. These Bodhisattvas were Bodhisattvas who had fully abandoned all that is to be abandoned, fully perfected abandonment, and fully realized all that is to be realized, fully realized abandonment, so that they were purified and developed in that way, which forms the word for awakening, or bodhi in Tibetan. However, here in this context, we're not speaking of this result of awakening itself, but rather of creating the cause for that, of generating the aspiration to reach that level, the motivation to reach that level. So as beginners, we are training in the path to reach that level. We haven't yet, as beginners, 100% perfected abandonment or realization. But we are now at the stage rather of creating that aspiration, practicing bodhicitta in aspiration, practicing the 4 immeasurables, which means wishing all beings to have happiness and the causes of happiness, and wishing them all to be free from suffering. We as beginners, even though we are not full bodhisattvas in this way, we can be like 50% on the way to being true bodhisattvas if we rely on this type of loving kindness and compassion, if we rely on the 4 immeasurables of loving kindness, compassion, equanimity, and sympathetic joy. The 4 immeasurables are the cause of bodhicitta. And the fruit is this perfection of abandonment and this perfection of realization that forms awakening, which the Buddha's 8 close sons had. So we, for now, though, are in training. And therefore, in this context, what we do is we generate that wish, bodhicitta, and aspiration, which relies on the 4 immeasurables.
야, 네 이체도 네도 타입이 심제 탐제 타바다 탐지기 고방 라야 답달 아양 톱 소백이 이체도 되니 장주 셈기 장주기 셈기 셈기 고게 요레스 되니 장주기 셈세 디설로 가르 세계에서 내 심지기 된지기 세들이 심지기 된 되니 내 심지 탐제 산지 살아 거기 삼비 셈딜라 되니 다이딜라 단다 직제디 숨바데 데지르 타이 심지 달지치 장주 심지 야슬라리 예송도 심지 탐제 산지 고방라 토베 이체도 달레기 체도 되니 내 장주 초도 심지기 삼바 셈바 딩니고나 셈케바딜라 되니 단다 내 슈바나지디 장주 심 야슬라리 예스 다 장주 셈바 탐지기 라레 레스기레 멤버 장주 심.
And so in order to bring all beings onto the level of liberation and omniscience, what we need is this motivation of bodhicitta, the motivation to benefit all beings and bring them all on the level of Buddhahood. And this is what is meant here by the second line of the verse, so as to bring freedom to all sentient beings, infinite in number. The practice of all the bodhisattvas is to arouse bodhicitta, generating this motivation from the bottom of our hearts, the motivation, the wish to bring freedom to all sentient beings, infinite in number, thinking this, wishing this from the bottom of our hearts. That is bodhicitta and aspiration, that is the practice of the bodhisattvas.
Sim sovala sovala kuburis. Najo mar meba. Sardu mar mebe ki sim ji gera, dila sardu soba. Samlo ji gera, samlo tang tang dila mar meba jila sardu soba jila ke se geres. Tanema ke bu chungu da ke bu dinga lo disim di yo mare. Medu najo sardu soba jila tene sim ke se ger. Tene sim ke gi sardu soe gi lega dila tene kyasu jamju semba thamji ge lagla yi sigir suye dila sen mebe dila sartu suye sartu nyombo suye jigla yakbo suye yarki tanga suye jigla ke sigir res tene jamju semba thamji ge lagla yi suye res suye ge.
And when we say generating bodhicitta, generating means creating something, producing something that was not previously there, right? Because as we've said, beings of lesser capacity and middling capacity do not have this motivation. They do not have this mindset. So we have to create a new mindset. We have to produce a new mindset. And this is what is meant by generating bodhicitta. And so creating, producing this new mindset, generating bodhicitta, that, and then further developing it as well, that is the practice of all the bodhisattvas.
Samba Janju Chodu Senke said that's how it is. People Chimbugi Lam.
And so this concludes this 10th verse of generating bodhicitta in the path of the great beings.
The Bodhisattva that Chukchik did Kunzu Janju Senje de la Kunzu Janju Gisem Semge Chida, Tendam Janju Semge Idus, Dignani, Tanda de Caps Baba Tanda, that the Chukchik de Kunzu Janju Sim the Sere PJ.
And so now we've arrived at the 11th verse, which among the two types of bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, concerns relative bodhicitta.
Kunzu Janju Gisem, Dadu Janju Gisem, Ni Yobanani, Kunzu Janju Gisem, Dila, Tene Diridu. Daxin Yamba, Daxin Jevas, Nidus.
And so among these two types of bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, within relative bodhicitta, there are two practices, namely equalizing oneself and other and exchanging oneself and other.
Chida Daxin Yamba, Daxin Jeva, Janju Semba Namji, Laglen Res, Laglen Ginamni, Ta Janju Semba Danjingi. Le Tangpo Badang, Tani Tanda Chige Chanju Semba Tsiniba, Niki Nani, Tanda Chidangi Daxin Yamba, Kome de Mangchiwaji, Mula Gomgo Sare Daxin Jeva di Jugla Gomgo Sare, Tanda Le Tangpo Ba Tsiniba Janju Semba Tamji ki Daxin Jeva di Chidangula. The Daxin Yamba the Le Tamboba than Zuki Chidanguela Gomtuna Yabu Sares.
And so generally, both equalizing oneself and others and exchanging oneself and others is the practice of the Bodhisattvas. But as for the difference between beginner Bodhisattvas and genuine Bodhisattvas, generally, it is best for beginner Bodhisattvas to start with equalizing oneself and others. So that usually we say that equalizing oneself and other comes before exchanging oneself and other. So that genuine Bodhisattvas, true Bodhisattvas, exchange oneself and other. As beginners, we should start by equalizing.
Oni da chingi ba gi jang sin ba je na rang che bar zin ba tham che ba pang je shin che bar zin ba ge chen bo sen du pena sang ge da jang sin ba den so gi ne rang le shin ha bo yin du zan ni rang che bar zin ba tham che ba me ba su cha ni she shin che bar zin ba yin du den da shin je ba de go men le la bo re res ta nga rang so na da shin je se du pe ka le ka bo re pena mi chu tam ba 지금 칼라도지 모모라지 사데바이나 미주 옛날에 다 미가 옛날에 냥보 참마 사데여나 드니 라운 저것도 되기여나 에 저것도 되나 드니 미주 나로네 다 랑게 모모디 피지 펜션에 때도 말해 미주 나를 셴바 랑 지시오 저것도 되라 담보랑 사이래 Dinduzane rang chebar che dadu shen chebar zimba di nyamne che la tos khapoy. Dindu 다시 당보 다시 냠바 공고에 res le 당보 받은죠. 제 다시 냠바 고메기 김세 단지 나라도 마르시바 딘딘바 딘스바 심제 탐지 때 토마메 바니 말 마치고 지냐요 말했는데 랑비 다신 제니 니 하고에도 니 다시 냠바 랑 간데 게첨부 임바 다시 시행 게첨부 임바디 니 하고사리 인도 니 다시 냠바 곰네 갈래가 다시 저거 곰네디 니 내나고 이랬어.
As beginners, it's quite difficult for us to practice exchanging oneself and others at first. As beginners, right now in our condition, wandering in samsara, we cherish ourselves very much. We put a lot of importance on our own selves. And for that reason, it's quite difficult to cherish others in the same way. Genuine bodhisattvas have abandoned all self-cherishing and cherish others instead. And therefore, it's quite easy for them to exchange themselves and others because they put more importance on others than on themselves. But for us, it's very difficult though. For example, if you're eating with a group of people, 5-10 people, let's say you're eating momos, you're eating dumplings with a group of people, and you yourself are very hungry, you'll make sure you get to eat first before giving any of your dumplings away to anyone else, right? So just in that way, it's really difficult for us to exchange ourselves and others. But first we should try to equalize ourselves and others. And the way we do that is, as I've mentioned before, first recognizing that all beings have been our kind mothers, recollecting their kindness, and then repaying this kindness. So that first we should examine, we should reflect in order to check whether really we think that all beings have been our kind mothers in past lifetimes. And then recollecting this kindness, thinking of repaying this kindness, that is how we can come to equalize ourselves and others. Think of others as just important as our own selves. And then based on that, it might become easier to exchange oneself and other as well. And so among these two types of bodhicitta, relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta, in the practice of relative bodhicitta, we practice tonglen, giving and taking. And I think, therefore, we'll stop here for today because I was thinking it would be very nice for us to practice, to actually practice this together, so that next time we can start by actually practicing giving and taking together, practicing tonglen together, and then also going through the text so that we're not only listening to a Dharma teaching, but also putting it into practice within a meditation session, doing some giving and taking practice. And I think if we combine these two, if we combine the practice and the listening, then really that would be the practice of the Bodhisattvas. But I think that would be a little too long for today. So I was thinking we could do that next time, to combine practice and study in that way. And so stop the explanation here for today.
Number time, homework ge kandi ko ge chegi res ne samlo stang do chis and di samlo ya ko stang to ba ina tene dakshin je wa se jungure jema dakshin rang je par zimba da she je par zimba ni kandi ge che sa re ke number ji dag je tang ro chi tene ya ko dag je tang tum na tene jema ge juma ge thun di la dakshin je par zimba ni pa je su je Sanje tamje shenje barzimbaji sanje gire naran se khorwat chameti dakje barzimbaji khora chamgure ta digni je boris rang je barzimbaji pha le tangji ni shenje barzimbaji pha te ne rang de le tangji pha te pha gi le tang ma thu baji yora sanje tamji dunga nyang de chu ne ta digni kandi ge che sar che na baji samlo ja ko tang ro chis chuma de ni 다신 제도 된들려고 이랬어.
And so today I'd like to give you all some homework for next time. Please, during this time, check for yourself which you cherish most, yourself or others. Examine this. Check for yourselves whether you put more importance on yourself or more importance on others. And if you reflect on this and come to see how much you cherish yourself, how much you cherish others, then it'll be easier next time to actually exchange oneself and other. That is to say, however much you cherish yourself, to place that much importance on others, and in exchange for the importance you place on others, and put that on yourself. As it is said, all Buddhas, Buddhahood is reached through cherishing others, while suffering within samsara comes from cherishing oneself, so that we wander in samsara due to our own self-cherishing. And Buddhahood can only be reached through cherishing others. That is why we need to exchange this. We need to exchange our self-cherishing for cherishing others. Give whatever good we have to others, everything that we hold dear, to give that away to others, and everything that we do not want, all being suffering, to take that on ourselves. So please reflect on this. Check for yourself just how much you cherish yourself, how much importance you place on yourself, and how much importance you place on others, because that'll make it easier to then swap that, to exchange that in the next session. Thank you. And if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. Samsam nanso samchan ki duknyal taipa la samlo tangna sem pamgire. Ta sem pamna nanso yangkyar gewala tsundu keyak tang chua keyak kitapshe karayore.
Oh, that's nice. The ina did around the samlo jachimbo tangure di indo tepa chimbo kapsu tanda tab dan hierap zunju jachimbo se la samlo tangdang jila tani tepa chimbo se yundu semba chunju jeyo mares karzina around la tangta capacity da ability kayam ne du ta tambo nemba jangju chodu to ge se di tanji tepa chimbo ki 다 고도 그래. 단단 감수 탑 가야 지도 매도 이나야 고속도 충전을 좀 그랬어. 심지 랑기 파마레 단다기 파마레 야나 단다기 빙갸레 단다기 조고 조모레 덴데라 율샤니 믹사기 율샤니 데니 덴조 그랑라 간디 펜토고도 덴조기 동아탄 동아레 달래기 치도 니 지게 점부레스 준주치 슈 냠내지 달래기 치도 마도 심지어 탐지 다다 가라서라 네바미도 근데 슈 점부지 생각 샤나 되니 디프레션 샤니 칼에 용거래 가스는 랑 capacity 메도 되니 상마파 단다랑 아주 두고 말해 빙동에 단지 쉬운 바 자정압주 장바던 인제기 지금 휴디 랑 파마제 야나 빙자도지 샤 갈래 로자치로 치로 샤도 되니 심제 탐지 랑 다단제 콘트빌레스.
So the question was, it can be very distressing thinking about the many ways beings suffer. What are your ways to stay motivated to persist in virtuous deeds? The great vehicle, as I've mentioned, is a practice of a very vast mindset. The method and wisdom and the diligence that accompanies that are extremely vast and necessitate a very fast outlook and not a small or narrow mind. But we at present as beginners do not have the capacity, we do not have the ability to accomplish those vast aims. That is why first we need to focus on bodhicitta and aspiration, which is said to be the gateway to the great vehicle. The door that leads into the great vehicle is bodhicitta and aspiration. Because right now we don't have the means to put into practice. We don't have the means to accomplish the aims, but we can aspire to accomplish these aims. And so at first we should start at our own level, focusing first on our own parents, our own relatives, our own friends, and focusing on them, thinking, how can I benefit them? What can I do for them? How can I free them of some of their suffering? And try to apply our effort in that. Because we don't really have the capacity at the moment to free all beings from their suffering. So we shouldn't stay too focused on that. We shouldn't compare ourselves that much to that great aim, because that can definitely cause distress. It can cause depression. We don't have the capacity. We can't measure ourselves up to the vastness of that aim. However, we can aspire for it. As I've said, if we rely on loving kindness and compassion, then we're already 50% of the way to true bodhicitta. Therefore, we should start where we're at and slowly develop from there, so that our capacity, our mindset, our motivation slowly becomes vaster and vaster.
Simba?
Any other questions? Chit lep song. The ngala tekar tang song kirang la lep samare. Oh, la so. The susu rangla ninje kande chigore. So the dak chepar mazine shen chepar zina susu la kande ninje gore da rang la kande ninje chigore. Shen la tsewa chene rang la kande tatung rang la kande ninje chigore.
Rang la ningje chambo china chi goes mixe yo mares. Ningje sena rang la ningje china tini rang che berjimba cha dugure. Tini tanda jaso la le na sung do dunga male dakte do le chums. Dunga tamje rang lik do ba le chungure res korwa se dunga. Ani ta rang sangje goge yo na sangye tamji dedo sonda zogbu sangye shiben simli chungs. Di gyazilane ta sangye jema legile. Di indo ta di nyi nangle, ta rangla nyingje se, di nyingje khande shi nyingje guyo na chambu shi na chi rang che bar zimba rangla zimba chimbo chi nga se chi shukyo do zani ta dambo di nga se di chungsa khane chungu do taksi dambo res. Nga se di nga rangzo marikpa le chungu re. Rwa marikpa se do zani nga yimba di ngo mashi ne mariks. Ini nga mashi ni mashi badila marikpa se re. Ani tini mashi endu nga le zimba shuk re. Tini nga late ni ta judgment se gura di chumbare tini nyomongba nga 중거래 되니 묘모방마라 되니 내 중거래 되니 내 딜라 되니 제부되다 걸어와 중거래 인도다 말하면서 정보시나 다 말은 인제 깨게 버리다 이나 랑한 인제 깨세 계자도 내중게 버렸어 인제를 났어 랑은 인제 세지 요 말에 내중게 버렸어 아니 랑라 모시 버렸어 마수리도 마세 코로라 참고의 인생 가래도 아니 대하 고송나 되니 신체 버진바들 안신 길레고 마치 버진나 코로라 참배 말 인제니 코로라 참배 나 코로라 마참 기치도 신은 인제 부두스 태고 전부 이날이다 양 태고 기부 충무다 링이 있나니 되니 랑은 인제 보래 되니 나오 감성 예소숨로 나다 패사도 마치부 민도 인제 나야 낸도 라다미 고반토비 삼바시나 기부 충무 차래 오다 코르와딜라 모네 나라는 인제 고도 나 코르와딜레 지기 도타게 도 도말 망보도 다라다미 고반토나야 기부 민도 도마도 다디 나야 타르파토 고사레 삼바시나 랑주고 삼바다는 다지 버진데 차 보고래 되게 이제 진짜 태고 친구에는 시행지 버전 거래 산지 고마 토고나 빈지 쳐봐도
So the next question was, how can self-compassion fit into not cherishing oneself while cherishing others? How should we practice self-compassion while cherishing others? We don't really need to practice self-compassion. There's no real reason to practice self-compassion. Self-compassion means cherishing oneself. And as it is said later on in the text, all misery comes from seeking happiness for oneself alone, while perfect Buddhahood is born from the wish for others' good. All the sufferings of samsara come from cherishing oneself, while Buddhahood comes from cherishing others. And having compassion for oneself, practicing compassion for oneself is basically cherishing oneself. So better than that, we should rather examine what that self is. Look for the I. What is the source of this self? Examining and finding that really the source of this feeling of I, the source of this sense of self, is ignorance. And that it's only in ignorance that we grasp onto the self. It's ignorance that causes us to cling onto a self. And from self-clinging comes judgment. And from judgment come the 5 afflictions, the 5 negative emotions. And based on the 5 afflictions, we create karma. And based on karma, we wander in samsara. So rather than compassion for ourselves, really we should give rise to renunciation. Seeing that, looking for this I, looking for this self that we cling onto, and understanding that that clinging onto the self itself is the cause for our suffering, is the cause for our wandering in samsara. And if we examine in this way, then actually cherishing others will naturally come to us. So having compassion for yourself, cherishing yourself, that's actually the cause of your suffering. It's the cause of your wandering within samsara. While cherishing others is the cause for Buddhahood. That, of course, is from the point of view of the great vehicle. If you follow the lesser vehicle, or if you follow the paths of beings of lesser or middling capacity, then you can definitely practice compassion for yourself, thinking, oh, it would be quite terrible if I fell into the lower realms of samsara. I really want to free myself from the lower realms of samsara. And therefore I will practice in order to gain rebirth in the higher realms. That would be the path of being of lesser capacity, or being of middling capacity, having compassion for themselves, thinking they're so afraid of the sufferings of samsara. It's so painful to wander within samsara, wanting to avoid this suffering. They think they wish for liberation just for themselves, based on that compassion, based on that self-compassion. So that would be the path of being a middling capacity. However, within the great vehicle, we cherish others in order to reach Buddhahood. La sutta Yankechi le son la sutta ne anik ki yinayang sangye ki nanso sosola sosola ninje mena rangla ninje mena ta nane shen la ninje kegi mares sangye ki sungsong di dak cheba jinpa mare yine tanyom yin sare dinde kido
Yes. Ninje sana da de Shen la ninje se di simje la ninje di ta thangbo rang la te ni ma do ha ko gu mare te rang dungal la nyamnyong la te ni o shen ya de ji yong gu dua dunga ji dua sin ni rang gi nyamnyong la te ni shen gi dungal ha ko to gu de do di nyamnyong gi se gi ma do di ninje se gi ma re ninje senata tene ninje sena ninje le rang sena to khari gu gu yor sena thanda te pach bu kapsu rang la goya di sherap ninje to disum di kore ta ninje de ha goya di rang gi dunga thani ngai shuba na she rang chogo to na khadi kale tu ani shen de rang chogo to na khadi kale yu sen ha gu ra 아니 랑카 꼼도 오 셴야 미미 바치 파레 아니 셴야 카 꼼나 카데칼레도 삼바치 랑라 테니 셴 하코도 랑라 마테나 셴 하코도 베마 닝제 지파레 닝제 테 카레 지게르스네 셴 랑라 테니 셴 닝제 고야디 랑게 동아르 테니 셴기 동아도 똑똑 베레스 랑라 데와 되기에나 셴 데와 되기에레 Diembala chipar dus. Ta ina ya rang ti chipar zinna nga chipu la samlo tangda na digi mindus. Nga michik redus. Simje se di mangbu redus. Kya tong ti bum. Ta khonzo la semra chi, khonzo ki chi donga chi chitum na. Ani di dimse re, di jibu re, pendo re, mangwa dus ene di ha gotu bires. Tadi tanyum re tanyum di karesna rang da shin chokri meba tanyum di rang dunga na shin dunga num re rang deva deva na shin dunga du re tanyum chipa re sa hak khutbe gi semam nipa nyamyon de la sigi res tili ninje sana khandese da sida khoya zuni ninje ko ko ninje lamna dik dik da ina ninje sido simje tamje le ning je ndo rang su du bra simje na
So there was a follow-up question. But the Buddha taught that we cannot have authentic compassion unless we have compassion for ourselves as well. Not self-cherishing, but equanimity. It's not so much what we call compassion. Rather, it's about one's experience of suffering. By understanding one's own experience of suffering, one understands that others suffer as well. So one needs to have an experience of suffering. One needs to recognize one's experience of suffering in order to recognize what others are going through as well. But that's not exactly what we call compassion. So in the context of the Great Vehicle, one needs three qualities: wisdom, compassion, and capacity. And compassion, it is true, first arises from understanding suffering. And understanding suffering first comes from understanding one's own experience of suffering, so that when you're hungry, then you understand how others feel when they're hungry. Or if you're thirsty and you see how difficult that is, then you can understand how difficult it is for someone else to be thirsty. So in that sense, experiencing suffering oneself helps us to understand other people's suffering and helps us to generate compassion for them. Likewise, seeing how one wishes happiness for oneself, one can understand that others wish for happiness just in the same way. And seeing that we wish to be free from suffering, we can understand that others wish to be free from suffering just in the same way. However, it's not so much about having compassion specifically for ourselves. It's not about cherishing our own self in this way, because I myself am just one person. Compared to the infinity of beings, the trillions, billions and trillions of beings that there are, this one person is really not that important. How much more important is it? How much more beneficial, how much more impactful is it to try to benefit all beings rather than try to benefit my one and only self? So in that way, we don't really talk about this as compassion. You can say it's compassion if you like, but that's not really what we mean by compassion when we speak of cultivating compassion in the Great Vehicle. It's more about understanding one's own experience and based on one's experience, then relating to the experience of others. And in that way, it's true, it is a type of equanimity. Equanimity means impartiality. And here, understanding that all are the same, all beings just as much as myself equally wish for happiness, all beings just as much as myself equally wish to be free from suffering. This type of equanimity or impartiality also helps us to better understand the suffering of beings and to generate compassion based on that. But that's not exactly what we would call compassion. Masota kandi shimfachi levson. The anijeki kadin cheta di selpochak son. Ani nanso the michik ki nanso la nuna nupachena ta midi la tsewa kandichi goresa.
미지기 라라추 네기나 파자와 간디치 그래서 라 네기기 저 간디치 코르스 다 식. 다가스기 지금 칸이 마시네 어닝제 코 말인데 자송선에 되게 말했어요. 핑기 말에 칸이 지금 라브셔는 닝제 코 말인데 자송다 산지게 송도 라마야 라피도 되니 디야 슈샤쇼라는 되게 말해. 김지시에 그랬어. 가리 이나에 김지시에 코 말라 가지는 마가래. 마가에 김생 가르친 진 마가에 김생 될라 때네 근데 랑게 아파 다지 제와치에 디기 김생의 하고네 되니 고 콜라야 지금 마가에 남바디 메버스웨기 김생야 랑기 시에코레스 다디 시에기 시에서디 다가기 시에 말해 정보시나 이디 다 유나메나 기탑디 최래 네, 다 상기게 망고지 숨으래 되게 탑. 와, 제가 간데 지구래 시인지게 수두자 지와이나 팔라 랭 간데 지구래 파 간데신 랭자 고래 간데신은 따고래 간데신이 이제 쉬고래 세디 추나로 배 살고 시샤이래 근데 나신이 라렌다는 지게래 이치그래 다 니바디 미디게 가시 갈라 내자베이나 테니 테나가지 페이지요 텔 페이지요레스 에 미디 셰당랑지 다포 말라 셰당지 랑지 에 셰당 랑차니 코라 주바지 심지 아니 주바데 갈레 잡지 다 주바데 갈레 잡아도 나도 파는 랑기로 랑사티 미디라 랑기레 तमने जिदा मिदिल लोंग लांग लाए यो मर करे सने क्यों लोंग लांग वो सने दुपद लांग बरस कांचे दुपद ना बोला पॉम सने फोगे दे के दे दुपद जाबरे को खान फोगे दे दुपद फो योंदु ताकि दुपद लोंग माला वाजे मिदिल लोंग आज ना मिले तो चिक धीरे हमको दुपद ला लोंग लांग बरे मिदिल लोंग लाए यो मरस याना निवदी चरांग मिदिल लोंग लांग बना मिदिल खरेशन लोंग लांग गे 가르스나 미디기 룽들의 시당들을 룽랑고레스 미디를 나야 말레스 가서 미디 컨든 너들 미도고 시당들을 룽랑고레스 미버레 근데 인도선이 다 룽가와 랑보다 랑보서 뭐마딘 두바레도 고가나 뽕스 두바도 뽕도 깨대 두바 자기리 두바들 룽랑고레 두바들 룽랑고요 바레 미디를 랑레 मिडिल लोग लाना मिडिल खांसी लोग लाना मिडी की शेदांग दे लोग लाना को मिडिल लोग लाए हमारे खांसी में मिडी की शेदांग दे किसी ने खांसी लोग लाना है ते इंदु ता दे लाते इंदु से मिडिल ता थमा तुना ता निंग जो बजी बस
The next question was how to love others from the bottom of our hearts when that person once hurt us. If someone has harmed you, it's of course not enough to just say, oh, have compassion. The Buddha taught that you should have compassion. The Guru taught that you should have compassion. Just have compassion. That probably won't be of much help. You really need to think of the reasons, investigate why did such and such a person harm me? Why would such and such a person not like me? Why would they then act upon that dislike and harm me? And how can I respond to that behavior? How can I then react to that behavior? And there are many teachings within Dharma. There are many different methods that are taught for responding to people who have harmed us. How we can talk to them, how we can react to them. There are many very clear teachings. And so it's fine to look at those and to practice in this way, to act in that way. But let me give you an example. Let's say someone gets angry at you and picks up a stick and hits you on the head. And so then you get angry at them, right? But if you think about it, why would you get angry at the person? It's the stick that hurt you, right? They hit you on the head with the stick hurt you. So why aren't you getting angry at the stick if the stick hurt you? If you still think that you should be getting angry at the person and not the stick, because it's the person that yielded the stick that hurt you. The reason why this person hit you in the first place is because they got angry. So shouldn't you be getting angry at their anger rather than at the person? Why are you getting angry at the person if they were impelled by anger, right? So if a person hits you on the head with a stick because they're angry, and you say you're not going to get angry at the stick because the person was the cause for the stick to hit you, but the anger was the cause for the person to want to hit you in the first place. So when you examine in this way, in the end, you see that all you can really do is give rise to compassion in that situation. There's nothing, no object to get angry at when you examine the situation carefully in this way.
양아니 파죽이 시당들라 롱랑고래 따디마도 다 미디코 이거 말했다.
So the reason why then we say we can only really generate compassion is because if we want to respond with anger, we really can't find an object to be angry at. If someone hits us with a stick on the head because they're angry, first you should think of getting angry at the stick, or if not at the stick, then at the anger that has caused that person to hit you. But as you examine in this way, you really won't be able to even find a person there to get angry at when you kind of break things down in that way. So there is no object to get angry at. And that is why one can only generate compassion.
율니에서 제당 다부지 메나 나즈 닝지 하고고 말에 닝지 곰투고 말레스 다가즈 닝지 곰세데 포시라 김제메레 제당 제랑소나테 네 텐데캅수 닝지 곰명도 닝지 율 소바 곰세 율 뭐네 당네 디차게 그레스 데인도 텐데캅수 당모네 김제 시니 데네 신 파닝지 게디 참 잠아도 용말에 제랑 시당기에서 율 소바 곰세 율디 맞을라 딱바라고 말했어. 까레 가고를 뒤엔도 가고레스. 미지 시다만서나 아체 나트린 가발. 닝지 검사 유라스. 세바 검사 유라스. 라나 가와 검진. 아니 미디자 투지체라 그랬어. 나트린 고갑테선 투지체 닝지 검사에 라서 세바 검사에 라서 계란 맨날 비제비제나 점링들이 닝한세나 비제 조사 말에 계란 드린 말은 람상 마가와치니 드린 안지린 님지 검사에 고합지라서 쓰면 투지체라고 그랬어.
And really, if one is a follower of the great vehicle, we should rejoice, we should be happy if someone gets angry at us, because they've given us an opportunity to practice compassion. They've given us an opportunity to practice patience. It's not that easy to meet with an object of patience or an object of compassion. It's not every day, it's not all the time that people get angry at you or show you some dislike. So if it weren't for them, if it weren't for that person who treats you badly, then you might not have met with an object of compassion or an object of patience. So in this way, understanding the reasons, if one really understands the reasons for generating compassion, practicing compassion, then one would really rejoice in finding someone who dislikes us or is mean to us in some way, because this doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen all the time that people treat us badly and give us this opportunity to practice patience and to practice compassion. So we should really thank them. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I might have, wandered around all day, or I might wander around the whole world without finding an object of compassion or an object of patience in this way. So thank you for giving me the opportunity today by being unkind to me or by showing some dislike towards me. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to practice patience. That's really how we should think if we practice the great vehicle.
Loving other is loving yourself.
Sorry. And as Annie J brought up in her questions, in the great vehicle, loving others is loving yourself. And I forgot to mention, Tulku said, really, when we're practicing compassion for all beings, that obviously includes ourselves, right? When we say we practice compassion for all beings, we're included within that too. Thank you all. And so we'll dedicate the merit now.